comes from 1 Kings 3, and we're going to start reading in verse 4 and go to 28. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings upon that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "Thou hast shown great and steadfast love to thy servant David, my father, because he walked before thee in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward thee. And thou hast kept for him this great and steadfast love, and hast given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in, and thy servant is in the midst of thy people whom thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered or counted for multitude. Give thy servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern thy people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this thy great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, "Because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall rise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." And Solomon awoke. Behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for all of his servants. And then 2 women, it's interesting, the Revised calls them harlots. I think we should just call them women who have children. Then 2 women came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "O Lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. And then on the 3rd day, after I was delivered, this woman also gave birth, and we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we 2 were in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while your maidservant slept, and I laid this child at my bosom, and laid my child at her bosom, and laid her dead son in my bosom. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, it was dead. But when I looked closely, it was not the child I had born." But the other woman said, "No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is yours." And the first one said, "No, the dead child is yours, and the living child is mine." And thus they spoke before the king. And then the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son, and that is alive, and your son is dead.' And the other says, 'No, but your son is dead, and my son is the living.' And the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, 'Divide the living child in 2, and give half to one and half to the other.' And then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, 'Oh, my lord, give her the living child. By no means slay it.' But the other said, 'It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it.' And then the king answered and said, 'Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means slay it. She is its mother.' And all of Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to render justice." And our second text comes from Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. One version of the Lord's Prayer that is in the Gospels. Verse 9. Pray then like this: Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We believe this to be the word of the Lord. So, meet Solomon with me today, as I imagine him. That's the only disclaimer you're really going to get. He's 20 years old. His parents have sent him to boarding school. He's with a renowned teacher. And he is in his second year studying civil and criminal law. His parents want him to study something that will help him become king. And the truth is, he wants to study art. He loves to draw. He's got an art class down at the marketplace that he sneaks off to on Thursday nights. He's tried to tell his dad that he could study drawing and he could become an architect, but his dad won't hear anything of it. His dad wants him to become king. His dad wants him to build the monarchy and spread the kingdom, solidify the dynasty. Suffice it to say, Solomon is glad that he doesn't live at home right now. At least here at school, he has friends, and he's even interested in this young woman that he sees on the way to art class, which might be why his parents don't want him to study art. But one morning, while he is on his way to his 10:30 class, that's the earliest class he has. He can't stand mornings. Anyway, he's walking to class, and he has a backpack thrown over his shoulder, and his right hand is in his pocket, and he has a half-eaten apple in his left hand, and he hears it. It's faded and distant. But he stops because the sirens are getting louder. And he looks for it, and sure enough, there is his father's motorcade. And Solomon shakes his head and he thinks, it can't be for me, because I haven't done anything wrong. I mean, unless they found out about the girl, but like they couldn't find out about the girl, because they don't know I go to art class. And so he says, it can't be me. And so he heads into the classroom. Throws his bag on the ground, finds his notebook, and as he's pulling out a pen, he hears a knock at the door, and he looks up, and there is the Secret Service at the door, and they're nodding to him and motioning him here. What now? And they say something to the professor, and the professor also nods as if to say, you gotta go. And so Solomon grabs his bag. On the way out, he tosses his apple in the trash can, and he starts in on the Secret Service. I have not done anything wrong. What is it? What is wrong now? You know, I'm a normal 20-year-old. It's okay that, and they just interrupt him before he goes any farther. Son, hold on for just a second. Let's get you out of here first. And so they motion for him to get into the car, and he sees that his mother is in the car. Mom, what's going on? And he looks at the Secret Service, and he looks at his mother, and as the car starts to take off, she takes Solomon's hand, and she says, Solomon, your father died. That's motorcade, or something. Now we know that the year is 1000 or so. We also know that there were no motorcades. But someone had to tell Solomon his dad died. There was a day when we think Solomon was about 20 years old, and his dad died. One day, instead of class, or whatever he was doing at 10:30 maybe, he had meetings with the State Department. And instead of drinks with his friends, he had coffee with the press secretary. Can you imagine Solomon at the end of that first day? Because I imagine he was thinking, I can't wait for just a few minutes to be by myself in my room. And then I bet he found out that they had already moved all of his stuff to the king's suite. A new bed and a new closet. Maybe they were kind enough to move his entertainment center, and we can assume that it didn't fit in the king's suite. Imagine that there again is a knock on the door, and this time is his mom. And she peeks in and she says, Solomon, are you okay? Solomon? And maybe she finds him standing in front of the entertainment center. The TV is off and he's staring at a blank screen. And he looks over at her, and I imagine that she's holding an Empire States back pillow. She hands it to him and says, "You love The Empire Strikes Back. I thought maybe you would like your pillow tonight." And he smiles, and she walks over to him and gives him a hug. And now the two of them are standing in front of a blank screen, maybe, and they have no words, right? What do you say? Their lives are forever changed. Their kingdom is in turmoil. Their beloved King David has died. And so again, it's the year 1000 or so, and I have taken huge liberties with this story. He most certainly did not have an Empire Strikes Back pillow, nor did he have a television, but he had a first night as king. And he did have a mom named Bathsheba. If we think about it, we can assume that a 20-year-old who has just lost his dad and now has become king has a mind racing with fear and anxiety and questions about his suitability, that he has grief, deep, sorrowful grief. And so to help us assume this, we have our text that says that he had a dream. Solomon dreamed that God asked him what he wanted. Solomon asked for an understanding mind and the ability to discern between good and evil. In the dream, God was pleased with Solomon's request, and so God was so pleased that God promised to give Solomon wealth and fame in addition. And then Solomon woke up because it was a dream. So then what happens? The text jumps to an example of the wisdom of Solomon. 2 women and 1 baby. 2 women, one distraught over the death of her infant, so distraught that she has concocted a lie, certainly a lie that she believes. My child did not die. No. This child is my child. Her child died. Her over there. She's screaming mad. Just look at her. I mean, why would I take her child? No. It's she who is distraught with grief. You see her. She's rolled over onto her child in the middle of the night and she killed her baby. And look, she's just gone mad. And the mad woman, who isn't really screaming as much as she hardly sounds human because there is a woman who has stolen her child, she woke to find another child, a dead child, lying beside her. She's so traumatized in her own way, and she's begging the king, "Make her give my baby back. He's mine. Don't you see? That child is mine. He has my chin. Look, right here, king. He's mine. That's my child. Give him back right now." Solomon stands. Young Solomon stands. And the court is hushed in reverence. They're waiting for his ruling. And he says, "Bring me a sword and bring me the child. We will cut the child in 2. And then you each can have the child." And the mother screams. You can hear her in your mind, right? No! Don't touch the child. And then you can almost imagine if she stood up, her legs would give way underneath her. She says, let him be. Don't hurt him." And she begins to sob, I would only imagine, with her head almost prostrate before the king. And the other mother is thrilled. She stands, nodding her head, but the king, we see, steps over to her and takes the child from her and says his true mother would never allow him to be harmed. And so he takes the child and he kneels and he gives the child back to the mother on the ground. And her tears continue to stream down and she kisses his forehead and then his ears and then his little hands. Again, I've taken great liberties with the story. But the wise ruling was that the rightful mother would want the child to be kept intact. That was the ruling. Here's what we also know of Solomon's reign. He was in a constant struggle to keep the kingdom of Israel intact. Throughout his reign, Israel was threatening to split, tribe from tribe. We can assume that one of the ways Solomon tried to keep the kingdom in one piece was through marriage or other relationships, because he had hundreds of wives and hundreds of concubines. Revolts still happened. Another way he tried to keep the kingdom in one piece was to enforce a tax. He divided territories by tribes and created an inheritance tax, but rebellions still broke out. During his reign, he initiated growth. Maybe that will keep it together. He built a huge palace. 15,000 square feet was his house. Perhaps another way to keep the kingdom together. Then he built a temple, 2,500 square feet. Not quite the behemoth his house was, but certainly would keep the people happy, or at least unified. That was Solomon's hope. It was his life's work to keep the kingdom in one piece, very much like this child and their two mothers. When Solomon died, the kingdom of Israel split into two. When God asked Solomon what he wanted, he asked for an understanding mind and the ability to discern good from evil. It's a good request. I can see why the text indicates that God was pleased with that request. An understanding mind takes a lot of work. Discernment is an everyday endeavor. It is not something we ask for once and we have it forever. In the Hebrew, the word for mind is the same as the word for heart. To this culture, the mind and the heart was really one and the same. Now, we think of our mind as like the reservoir of our intellect. And we think that our hearts hold our emotions. And honestly, I would say that our culture is a little suspicious of our hearts. We think our minds are more secure as a place of knowledge or discernment or wisdom. But for the Hebrew thinker, for Solomon, for David, Joshua, Moses, Joseph, Abram, and Noah, all the people we've talked about so far, the mind and the heart functioned together. Together, they form the place where discerning good and evil can happen. An understanding mind is an everyday endeavor. A mind and a heart that work together to discern good from evil requires everyday attention. Today we begin our stewardship season. We have carved out 4 weeks to talk to one another about what we want for our church. What do we want God to help us become? What is our request as we begin this first full year as Grace Presbyterian Church? Solomon asked for wisdom, an understanding mind. And my prayer is that God would give us understanding minds and hearts, and that they would work together so that we would discern what is good and what is evil.